We're going to have our introduction in Luke chapter 9, segueing from last week, but if you want to turn somewhere, you can go and turn to Luke chapter 17. Luke chapter 17. As we segue from last week, as we were finishing up, we were in Luke chapter 9 where Jesus was continuing to invite and recruit others to come and follow him. And in verse 59 of Luke 9, he mentioned it to one and he said, let me first go and bury my father. And there were obvious concerns. He wanted to make sure the estate was settled so he was financially secure to be able to follow Jesus. And Jesus says you can't wait on that. Then the next verse, you had another one says, I need to at least go and bid them farewell. So both of them were making excuses that really and truly, you know good and well, even this day, if someone doesn't give you an immediate reply, yes, if they give you a let me think on it, or let me do this and I'll get back with you, you know good and well, chances are they're not getting back with you. Jesus was aware of that. It was the same way in their culture. He knew good and well if you take time to go process a funeral, and if you take time to go visit everybody and tell them goodbye, they may talk you out of it. There's a good chance you won't go. Jesus was well aware of the human tendency. So he was telling them in verse 62, and Jesus said to them, no man having put his hand to the plow and looking back for whatever reason, for whatever excuse, is fit for the kingdom. Now we explained this word fit is different than the word for meet or worthy. Worthy was axios, having to do with balancing the scale. That has to do with your character, moral worthiness. This word fit is, are you functionally fit? Are you well fit for placement? Are you serviceably fit? And we use the example, and I didn't have the tool, but I do tonight, and we were mentioning how that you could use a pair of channel lock pliers, and you could use it to turn a pipe, you can turn it to loosen a bolt, but many times we've turned it on its side and tapped in hammered in a nail with it, especially a little small paneling nail. But this right here is what's designed for that. Okay? We also mentioned how you could take a screw that is sticking out, a recessed screw, and you could take it and turn it and back it out if you needed to. But this is designed for that. So it was all about everybody being fit for what you're called to do. We used you as an example with the piano. Others when it comes to teaching or administration. Well, I don't want to focus on the fit part as we did last week. What I want to focus on is, as we segue, is that one phrase, and looking back. And looking back, because that's the key. He says, if you look back, now why would you look back? We're going to get into that tonight. Looking back, wondering what? What are you wondering when you look back? What are you thinking about that may be priority over following him? So with that in mind, we ask the question, where else do we see where somebody else looked back? Y'all probably immediately think of one in particular, and we're going to cover that tonight. Okay? Well, and meanwhile, in Luke 17 is where we ask you to turn. Jesus is speaking here in Luke 17 and verse 25. He begins by letting them know, giving him one of the many hints, one of the many clues that he's about to go to the cross. He said, but first he, the Son of Man, is the context, the subject here, must suffer many things and be rejected by this generation. He was saying he's going to suffer many things for the sake of the gospel, and he's going to be rejected for the sake of the gospel. Okay, that's important. And he says, and just as it happened in the days of Noah, so it will also be in the days of the Son of Man. It's important when Jesus takes an Old Testament parallel and brings it into his time. And he wants to make a New Testament parallel with the culture of that day and basically say, it's the same way today as it was back then. It hadn't changed a bit. Culture hadn't changed a bit. I mean, yeah, it may be a little more technologically advanced, but it's still the same thing. So what was the tendency for everybody during that day, Jesus' day? It was the same as in the days of Noah. And he says in these last days, it'll be the same, and it is in our culture. So as we mention it, see how it fits today's society. He says they were eating and they were drinking. Now, there's plenty of people going out to eat at restaurants. There's plenty of people who are drinking, and they're using any kind of occasion, whether it's celebratory or whether it's depressing, to be able to resort to drinking. He says they were marrying and they were being given in marriage. So you got the young couples who are marrying, and you got the parents who their mind is on selecting, a husband for my daughter, giving her away, that year-long or longer plans that are in the making, because we talked about before a Jewish wedding, the betrothal, and then it was over a year in preparation. So that was what many were focused on. They weren't focused on the kingdom. They were focused on family matters. He says, until that day that Noah entered the ark, and the flood came and destroyed them all. Summarize it. Some party, some sacrifice. Some live it up, some deny themselves, take up their cross, and follow Jesus. Okay? Hebrews chapter 11 and verse 6 refers to this. If you want to stay in Luke 17, you can, because they're coming right back there. But if you want to just hold your thumb there and then go over to Hebrews chapter 11. In Hebrews chapter 11 and verse 6, we have the very familiar passage that says, and without faith, it is impossible to please him, God. For he who comes to God must believe that he is, and he is a rewarder, the mistapodotus, of those who seek him, those who diligently seek him. Now, we're not repeating something that we've already taught. What we're saying is, in this context, the very next verse says, by faith, Noah. Noah operated in by faith to build an ark, being warned by God about things not yet seen. What had they not yet seen? They had not yet seen rain. They certainly hadn't seen a flood. But what he's saying is this. He was warned by God of something that nobody else is going to rain. What's rain? What you talking about? Man, you crazy. What are you talking about it's going to rain? What is that? Okay? Well, because he said before that, remember, the water used to come as a mist, like the dew in the morning. And that's how the crops were nourished and everything. But he says here, there's something coming you've never seen before. But he's warned by God. Now, as you know, there's a difference between a caution and a warning. A caution is better be careful. There's a pothole in the road. A warning is, don't go down this road because, the bridge is out. Okay? One is dire warning and the other is caution. Now, what does it say here? Warning. But this word warning, although it's translated warning, it does not mean what we think of as warning. In the Greek, it is krematizo, and it actually refers to a business transaction. It refers to business advice, business partners. It means to advise or consult about something that's important. It literally, in this case, means to be divinely advised and warned. It's no different than somebody is thinking about taking out a loan, or somebody's thinking about going into a certain amount of debt to open a business. Well, somebody who has done that before may go to them and say, look, you don't need to go that route right now with the interest rates. I would advise you not to do that. Okay? I would advise you not to go that deep in debt. You better wait or find something cheaper. That's a little too much for you to have out there in debt in this economy. Well, what is that? That is warning them, don't do it. But it is from a sound business advice. So it says Noah had a good relationship with God, that God could give him business advice. God could give him practical cautions or warning. And that's what it is here. And it says his response was in reverence. Now the King James says move with fear. But that word actually means to take urgent action seriously. So take action, do it urgently, but be serious about it. So go ahead and build this ark and don't wait. Don't procrastinate, get going. I'm serious. It's going to rain. It's going to flood. He prepared an ark for the salvation of his household. Now this word salvation is soteria. It's one of the words that's right there with sozo that has to do with salvation. And may I remind you, we've covered this before. When you see the word salvation in the New Testament, you immediately think eternal salvation. That is the second definition of sozo or soteria in the Greek. That is the second definition. The first is the more frequent use of it, and that is temporal deliverance from danger. In other words, rescue. Rescuing you from trouble, from danger, impending danger. Or maybe you're in trouble and it's a rescue attempt. Whether it's EMS or fire or anyone else with emergency personnel, sheriff, police, highway patrol, they are rescuing you from danger. Okay, that's what that particular primary definition is, and that's what his context is here. He said, this is for the salvation of your family. This is to preserve your family. By which he condemned, which means decisively pronounced judgment against the world. And in doing so, he became an heir of the righteousness which is according to faith. He became an heir of righteousness. Now we hear about Abraham believed God and it was reckoned to him as righteousness, but we go all the way back to Noah about righteousness. And you're going to hear more about righteousness as we continue to study because it's so important. Okay, so when we're studying this, and again, not to be arrogant or cocky or say that we're on the cutting edge, but I can't help but think myself personally, and that is for the first 6 months of this year, we've been discussing enlightenment versus salvation. Is that God warning us that we need to get this message out? What we're studying now, the cost of discipleship, addressing the body of Christ. You better be ready to pay the cost of discipleship because you might just not be the disciple you think you are. Okay? Maybe, just maybe, that's the purpose for us to study, is to get people ready because just like it was with Noah, something's coming. Jesus is returning soon. Now back to verse 28 of Luke 17. It says, now he's talking about what happened in the days of Noah. He says the same way it was in the days of Noah. They were eating and they were drinking, they were partying, they were marrying and giving in marriage. They were all about familial relationships. They were just going about business as usual. Now he shifts gears and he says it was the same as happened in the days of Lot. They were eating, they were drinking, they were buying, they were selling, they were planting, they were building. In other words, he adds, they were buying, they were selling, they were planting, they were building. The economy was good. The economy was such that it enabled them. There wasn't a famine in the land. There wasn't an economic crisis in the land. There was plenty where it could be, where you could have all kinds of transactions, so they were busy doing it. Okay? He says, but on the day that Lot went out from Sodom, the day that Lot left Sodom, it rained fire and brimstone from heaven and destroyed them all. Same use of words, same phrase as it was with the flood. Sodom and Gomorrah destroyed them all. Okay? It will be just the same on the day that the Son of Man is revealed. It'll be the same day, the day the Son of Man is revealed. He's warning us what's happening in our culture today. There's a lot of marrying and giving in marriage. There's a lot of eating. There's a lot of drinking. There's a lot of farming. There's a lot of buying. There's a lot of selling. There's a lot of building. I mean, you look at Charleston, Somerville, Hilton Head, you got all these, I mean, even closer to, where you work down there next to Exit 8 and all these other places are developing. I mean, it's just a lot going on. And he's saying that's common right before judgment comes. It happened with Noah. They were partying it up. God warned Noah, and Noah warned the people. Now we're dealing with Abraham, the father of our faith. And he's saying now in our day, we're dealing with the same thing. Jesus is coming, and people aren't ready. They weren't ready for a flood, and they certainly weren't ready for the fire and brimstone coming in Sodom and Gomorrah. Okay, Genesis 18:22 is what this is referring to. So if you want to flip back to Genesis 18, we're going to address the looking back. Looking back to what? In Genesis 18 verse 22 it says, "Then the men turned away from there and went toward Sodom, while Abraham was still standing before the Lord. Abraham came near and said, 'Will you indeed sweep away the righteous with the wicked?' There are a few righteous people in Sodom and Gomorrah. Will you indeed wipe them out, or will you rescue them?" Now, I use the word rescue because Peter's going to use the word rescue. Will you rescue the righteous people out of all this partying, out of all of this culture that is sensual, demonic, it is liberal, it is, you only live once? He said, will you deliver the righteous out of this? Okay? And he says, suppose there are 50 righteous within the city. Will you indeed sweep it away and not spare the whole place for the sake of the 50 righteous? God says, I will spare for 50. Then he says 45. And he says, I will not destroy it if I find 45. He says 40. And he says, I will not do it on account of the 40. Then he says 30, 20, 10. And he says, I will not destroy it on account of the 10. Okay? Well, the point is this. We need to understand God is a God of mercy. God is a God of grace. But he's also a God of judgment. Mercy is God withholding from us what we really deserve for the sake of the righteous. Justice is getting what we really deserve. And in grace is God giving us what we don't deserve and could never deserve or earn. That's the difference between mercy, justice, and grace. You either, what you got coming to you is withheld from you in mercy, is being given to you in justice or judgment, or it is what you deserve or whatever is not being given to you, but you're being given instead what you could never earn or deserve. That's grace. Okay, but here God is not on a sin hunt. He's not on a sin hunt. You've heard about being on a witch hunt. Somebody's on a witch hunt. They're trying to look for something to fuss about. They're trying to look for something to write an employee up about. Well, God's not on a sin hunt. He wasn't then, neither is he today. He's on a righteousness hunt. That's why Abraham comes to him and asks him about how many righteous would it take for you to spare the city. Okay? He's on a righteousness hunt. So flip over, if you will, to Genesis 19, the next page. Okay? This is the warning to get the righteous, to spare the city until the righteous can get out of there. Withhold in mercy, withhold judgment, which is what is due them, because they've been eating, drinking, marrying, giving in marriage, building, planting, all this kind of stuff, and they have absolutely no heart for you. They're just living it up in the world. And we know good and well that there comes a time in which you've been in mercy all this time. But when the righteous are removed, here it comes. It'll be the same way with us. That's another reason for a pre-tribulation rapture, which I don't see how you could argue anything else against it, because the Bible gives so much evidence for a pre-tribulation rapture. It's the church and Holy Spirit operating in the church that likewise is holding back the tribulation. It's when the church is gone, just like when the righteous get out of Sodom and Gomorrah. It's when the church is raptured, then judgment through the tribulation can come. But not until. Because he's withholding it for the sake of us, the righteous, who are still here on the earth. When we're gone, just like when Lot and his family gets out of Sodom and Gomorrah, Then, boom, here it comes. It's no different than in a military when our troops get out of the area, bomb it. It's the same procedure, okay? Well, in Genesis 19, verse 15, it says, when morning dawned, the angels urged Lot, saying, up, take up your wife and your 2 daughters who are here, or you will be swept away in the punishment of the city. Get up and get ready to go. Okay, you can stay right there in Genesis 19 because we're coming right back to it. But what is happening here is what Paul refers to in 1 Corinthians chapter 10 and verse 13. It mirrors it. Okay? In 1 Corinthians 10:13, relating it to the day, it says, there hath no temptation. We're going to come back to this in our study. We're going to come back to this several times in our study. There hath no temptation taken you, but such as is common to man. Now, this word for temptation is parasmos, and in this context is better translated trial. There's no trial that you're going through that's not common to man. Other people have gone through it. My wife lost her mother Friday morning, and we had the funeral on Monday morning. Well, that is a trial that she and the family had to go through, but it's common to man. Other people have lost loved ones. See what I'm saying? It's a trial. Okay? But God is faithful. He will not suffer you to be tempted, but above that ye are able. But will with the temptation, now is more of a context of going through a tough trial, a heavy burden, a weighty matter, a crisis situation, or even a temptation to sin or to get over into something that you were delivered from, to go back into it. He says, he will not allow you. In other words, he will not permit you or leave you alone, abandon you, and let you just sit there. He says, but he will make a way to escape so that you may be able to bear it. That's exactly what he's doing here with Lot and his family. He's given them the way of escape. The question is, can we see it and will we take it? When we get to this study on dealing with our appetites and our impulses and our fleshly lust and all that kind of stuff, and you go ahead and be looking until we get to that discussion in the next several weeks. But you go ahead and be thinking in the meantime, when there, you know good and well something that you're prone to fall for, that you're very susceptible to. And the next time you're tempted to partake of that fleshly desire, that fleshly appetite, lose your temper, whatever it is. Let's just use lose your temper as something that God's dealing with you and you just have a hard time. The next time there's a situation and you are tempted to lose your temper, look for the way of escape. Look for the way of escape. It could be so much as a phone call that gets your mind off of, I am so mad right now. All of a sudden there's a phone call and it's your spouse and you got to talk sweet. So you go over and you get on the phone and you say, hey, how you doing? Okay, I'll be home about so-and-so. And then you hang up and then you come back. Can you immediately go back to being mad as you were before? He just gave you the way of escape. He gave you the way to get your mind off of how angry you are at the moment, to calm down enough to answer the phone, talk sweetly to your spouse. Now come back and without rage or anger, handle the situation. But we got to see the way of escape. Who would just simply hit the phone and say, I'll call her back. La, 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 la. He just gave you the way of escape. Answer that phone. Okay? Because that phone call may be something that you need to calm you down. Maybe there's good news on that phone to help settle you down because you're about to lose your cool. Look for the way of escape. And he's given Lot a way of escape here. The question is, will we see it? Will we recognize it? And will we take it? That's the question. Okay? So, and this word for a way of escape in the Greek is ekbasis. Ek means out. Baino has to do with walking or marching. He'll give you an opportunity to march right out of it. He'll give you a way to walk out of it. And it says that when he gives you that way of escape, that you may be able to bear it. That word bear is hupophero in the Greek. Hupo means under. Pharaoh means to bring or to carry. It has the imagery of, well, if you put the words together, underneath, carry. It has the imagery of being in the water at the beach and that undercurrent just taking you down the shore. You're just being drifted away. Whatever you're going through, God is not going to just let you sit there and suffer beyond that which you can handle. He may let you deal with it for a while, and we're going to show you to test you. To test your faith, to test your patience, to test your endurance, to see whether or not you're going to come through with flying colors. You know, I said shining colors, flying colors, whatever the phrase is. He wants to test you and see how you go respond. But he's not going to just let you sit there and suffer. He's going to give you the way of escape, and it'll be where you can just drift right out of it. Answer the phone. Okay? All right. Now, go back to Lot here. But he, Lot, hesitated. So the men seized his hand, and the hand of his wife, and the hands of his daughters. They're jerking a knot at him and say, let's go. Because you're hesitating. We've got to go. That bomb's going to go off any minute now. It's ticking. We've got to go. All right? And he says, for the compassion of the Lord was upon him. Why? We're going to answer that question a little bit. Why? Why was his compassion upon Lot? Why? Did he do anything to earn it? Why? Okay, hold that thought. And they brought them out, and they put him outside the city. When they had brought them, his whole family outside, one said, escape for your life. Look at the next words. Do not look behind you. That is a warning. Not a caution, that is a warning. Do not look behind you. And do not stay anywhere in the valley. Escape to the mountains, or you will be swept away. It's no different than an explosion like you see on TV, and you got to be so far away so the debris of that explosion don't catch it with shrapnel. You got to get out of there far enough that when the explosion, you're not affected. Okay? All right. He says, do not look behind you. Escape to the mountains, or you'll be swept away. But Lot said to them, oh no, my lords. Now behold, your servant has found favor in your sight, and you have magnified your loving kindness, which you have shown me by saving my life. But I cannot escape to the mountains, for the disaster will overtake me, and I will die. But now, behold, there is this town near enough to flee to. It's outside of the danger zone, and it is small. Please let me escape there. Okay, is it not small? That my life may be saved. He said to him, behold, I grant you this request also, not to overthrow the town of which you have spoken. In other words, the debris, the effect of the bombing, so to speak, of the hellfire and brimstone, this town will be spared. The residual effect will not extend that far because you're there. Therefore, the name of the town was called Zoar. The sun had risen over the earth when Lot came to Zoar. Then the Lord rained on Sodom and Gomorrah brimstone and fire from the Lord out of heaven, and he overthrew those cities, and all the valley, and all the inhabitants of the cities, and what grew on the ground. But his wife, this is Lot now, but his wife from behind him looked back. What were they warned to do? Not to look back. She looked back. And she became a pillar of salt. Now that word pillar in the Hebrew, I can't pronounce it because it's got like one vowel and everything else is consonants, okay? All right, so I won't try it. But it has to do with a military post, or if you will, a statue. She's walking along, and all of a sudden she became a statue of salt. Now, not that you will go there and grab a spoonful of it, but what it means is she was pulverized and dissolved into a powder. And it was in the formation of a statue. She just froze. She was gone. Okay? She was dissolved into a pillar of salt. Why? because she looked back. But why spare Lot? Peter answers that question in 2 Peter chapter 2, beginning in verse 4. For if God did not spare angels when they sinned, all the way back to Lucifer when he tried to rebel and took 1/3 of the angels with him in the fall, but cast them into hell and committed them to pits of darkness, reserved for judgment, and did not spare the ancient world in the days of Noah, but preserved Noah, a preacher of righteousness, with 7 others, his wife, his sons, and their wives, when he brought a flood upon the world of the ungodly. And if he condemned the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah to destruction by reducing them to ashes, having made them an example to those who would live ungodly lives thereafter. Anyone living ungodly lives, they're what? Eating, drinking, marrying, giving in marriage, partying and partying and partying, living it up, buying, selling, building, all that kind of stuff. It's all about worldly ambitions. He says, this is supposed to be a lesson to them, an example to them. And if he rescued righteous Lot, Lot is called righteous, even though he was living in Sodom and Gomorrah. He was called righteous. Oppressed by the sensual conduct of unprincipled men. He was oppressed by the sensual conduct of unprincipled men. We can be easily oppressed by the sensual conduct of unprincipled men and women. Just turn on the TV. Just look at what you see going on in this world today. The sensual, lewd conduct. Whether it's conversation, whether it's skimpy of how you're scantily clad in clothing, whether it's what you're exposing, whether it's whatever it is we see today. We can easily be oppressed by the sensual conduct of unprincipled men, for by what he saw and heard, that righteous man, while living among them, felt his righteous soul tormented day after day by their lawless deeds. Now that right there will preach. If you are not vexed, if you are not tormented, if you're not grieved by what we see going on in the world today, but we tolerate it, what we tolerate will elevate. What we elevate will celebrate. If we're not disturbed by it, if it doesn't bother us, then maybe we're in the middle of it. Just maybe we're one of them. But as righteous people, that behavior should bother us. It should gross us out when we think of homosexuality. It should gross us out when we think of all kinds of sexual perversions. We should find it absolutely disgusting. We should find it absolutely appalling and make you want to gag. But anyone who doesn't, could it be that they're in the midst of it? But he calls Lot righteous because he knew his heart. That even though he was in the world, he was not necessarily of the world, but he was vexed by what was going on around him in the world. And likewise should we. He says, if he will deliver Lot, righteous Lot, out of Sodom and Gomorrah, the most horrible place that we know of in the Old Testament. The closest thing in the New Testament is Corinth. But still, Sodom and Gomorrah is probably 1A, if not numero uno, all by itself. If he will rescue Lot out of that mess, he says, then the Lord knows how to rescue the godly from temptation. If he can get Lot out of Sodom and Gomorrah, he can get you out of any temptation that you face. He can get you out of any bad habit that you face. He can get you out of any impulse or any fleshly desire or any appetite that you have, any bad habit you have. He can get you out of it. If he can rescue Lot from the extreme liberal activity in Sodom and Gomorrah, then he can certainly deliver us from the extreme liberal activity of our culture today. He can deliver us from participating in those things. And to keep the unrighteous under punishment for the day of judgment, and especially those who indulge the flesh in its corrupt desires and despise authority. Daring, self-willed, they do not tremble when they revile angelic majesties. Okay? Now, let me ask you this in the context. You already know the answer because we've already set the stage for it. What brought judgment upon Sodom and Gomorrah? What was it that brought judgment upon them? You could say, well, they were eating and drinking and they were partying and they were doing it up, doing all this and they were living it up. Okay, let me summarize it if you will. And again, see if it doesn't fit today's culture. Their private sin became public law. That's what God's watching. When your private sinful activity that you've been doing in your own home is now your lustful preferences at home, those perversions that you have been doing at home, when now they become social norms. Those who were doing homosexual activity in their house, now they want it to be a social norm. There's a big issue now. Should transgender be able to play women's sports? There's a big issue about that. What happened? What was going on in private is now become a social norm. And they want laws to protect it, to condone it, and to allow it. Is that not what we see in our society today? Is that not exactly what was going on in Sodom and Gomorrah? Is that not exactly what was going on prior to the flood? We have to warn, and we are being warned by God to warn others of the impending danger if you keep blending in with the culture. Be in this world, you got to go to work. You got to go to a restaurant. You got to go to the grocery store, but don't be of it. Therefore, the judgment that is subject to and due upon the individual, those who are conducting those perversions at home, the judgment that's due them, because you brought it out into corporate society, now corporate society has to be judged. Let's just use the homosexuality for an example. The transgender, both of those issues. If that was something that was only happening in certain neighborhoods, in certain homes, in certain, cultures, then that's bad enough with that. But the fact, because judgment would be destined toward that area. Say, for instance, New Orleans, Louisiana, Mardi Gras. Say, for instance, Mardi Gras and Louisiana, New Orleans is the only place in America where that kind of stuff happened. Well, judgment will be coming to New Orleans. But because that which was narrowed down to one location is now become a social norm all across America, and because it has been embraced by the liberal agenda, and it's not only a social norm, but now there's laws to allow it, now America's got to be judged. But he's looking for the righteous ones in the midst of it to get us out of it before the judgment comes. And we need to warn others, just as Noah did. There's a flood coming. We need to warn others, hellfire and brimstone's coming. You need to get out of that lifestyle. You need to get out of that. He's calling us to warn, because Jesus says in the last days it'll be just like the days of Noah, and it'll be just like the days of Lot. So the moment what they were doing in their private parties now is transitioned to the public to be accepted by society. Now society is subject to judgment. Proverbs 14:34 says, righteousness exalts a nation, but sin is a disgrace to any people. Righteousness is a right standing in position with authority. But you need righteous behavior to reflect that inner reality. Exalts, it lifts up, it brings honor to. When you got righteousness and authority, righteousness in the Oval Office, righteousness in Congress, righteousness in the State House, righteous in the county council meetings, when you got righteousness there, then he can exalt that area. But otherwise, it's a disgrace. It's a wicked thing that brings shame and ruin. Back to Luke 17. Luke 17 and verse 31. He says, on that day, the one who is on the housetop and whose goods are in the house must not go down to take them out. Don't look back. Don't think about all your valuables, things that you consider valuable. If, like we've talked about before, if you've got like a major flood like we had in North Carolina, and you got people who are standing on the rooftops of homes, and the helicopters are coming in to pick them up, and to scoop them up and rescue them from the floodwaters before it just takes their house on down the river. He says, don't go try to climb back in that house to go get anything. You accept the rescue offer that's being made because it's your way of escape. Take the way of escape. Lot did, and he and his family were spared. Noah did, he and his family were spared. And those are the two examples that Jesus uses. And he says, likewise, the one who is in the field must not turn back. You don't turn back and go to the ranch house. You don't turn back and go to the house to get belongings. When I call you out of the field, you keep walking with me. They left their nets and didn't go back home. They left the tax business and didn't go back home and followed him. It was, then the next thing it says in verse 32, one of the shortest verses in the Bible. The shortest verse, you know, is John 11:35. Jesus wept. What's right behind it? Verse 32 of Luke 17. Remember Lot's wife. She looked back. Now I got news for you. What constituted looking back? It was not a mere glance to where God's looking, because he's not on a sin hunt. He's not looking to drop the hammer and it's like, okay, she looked back, bam. No. What she did was not a mere glance. She looked back out of a longing for what they came out of, and or a desire to return to it. See, we're setting the stage for any and every one of us to be delivered from any bad habit, any issue, whether it's tangible, like an eating issue that we got to deal with, whether it's intangible anger issues that we got to deal with, whether it's an appetite, whether it's a lustful appetite, whether it's an addiction to drugs, alcohol, smoking, whatever it is, chewing tobacco, you name it. It could be soft drinks, as we talked about. Anything that we need to be delivered out of, when he gives us the way of escape. And while we're taking the way of escape, which is what Lot and his family was doing, don't look back with a longing for that which you've been delivered from. And don't look back with a desire to return to that which you've been delivered from. You've been delivered from smoking. I know good and well you're not going back, but I'll use you an example. Don't look back longing for a cigarette. Don't look back with the desire to return to that lifestyle where you were smoking a pack a day or whatever it was. He says don't do it. We're not talking about a mere glance when you face I'm so aggravated I could use a cigarette right now, We're not talking about that. That's a mere glance. And you nip it in the bud and say, nope, devil, get thee behind me, Satan. You okay? I'm talking about an issue of the heart where you have a longing for it or a desire to return to it. That's what we're talking about. Okay? So, Jesus says, if you cannot let go of what's behind, you cannot have what's ahead. Period. Now, it could be a job. We've used this in other examples. It could be your job. You know good and well God's calling you to do something. But you know that job is keeping you from doing that. It's no different than the old let's make a deal. Okay, you opened up curtain number 1. Okay, well, you can have curtain number 1, or you can let go of curtain number 1 for what's behind curtain number 2. And they'll tell you, no matter how bad you want to know what's behind curtain number 2, it hasn't been revealed yet. That's apocalypto. That is revelation. It hasn't been revealed to you yet. But you have to make a decision right now. Do you want what's behind curtain number 1? Or do you want what's behind curtain number 2? And you got to make a decision. You cannot have behind what's curtain number 2 until you first choose to let go of what's behind curtain number 1. He said it's the same way here. Verse 33. Whoever seeks to keep his life will lose it. That's apolumi. We'll get to that. And whoever loses his life will preserve it. Preserve in the Greek is similar to that word for preserve in the Old Testament when Noah says he preserved his family unto salvation. It means to save from death, to rescue. It is the New Testament version of a rescue. Okay? I tell you, on that night, when he returns, there will be 2 in one bed. One will be taken, the other will be left. What does it mean by that? He's obviously talking husband and wife. One spouse will go in the rapture. The other spouse will wake up and find out the spouse is gone. That's what he says will happen. He says there will be 2 women grinding at the same place. One will be taken, the other will be left. 2 men will be in the field or the woods. One will be taken, the other will be left. And answering, they said to him, Where, Lord? And he said to them, Where the body, which means carcass, is, there also the vultures will be gathered. Where the carcass or the body is, there also the vultures will be gathered. Where there's spiritual decay, the vultures prey. Where there's spiritual decay, the vultures prey. Now, I think we read this last week, but we talked about Lot's wife becoming a pillar of salt. Why that example? Why that? I know we have the phrase, someone's not worth their salt, because they used to be paid with salt. Many of the soldiers were paid with salt, okay, because it was that valuable commodity. So a lot of times that's where you get the phrase, well, he didn't earn his pay that week, so he's not worth his salt. Well, it talks about the fact that salt is such a valuable commodity, but yet is it possible for salt to become useless? Luke 14:35. Salt is good, but even if salt has become tasteless, with what will it be seasoned? What are we going to use as a salt substitute? If the salt won't season it, what are we going to use? It is useless either for the soil or for the manure pile. It is thrown out. He who has ears to hear, let him hear. Translation, Luke 9:62. Who puts his hands to the plow, and because you look back in longing for what you left behind, or a desire to return to what you left behind, you may not be physically turned into a pillar of salt, but you, as the salt of the earth, Jesus calls us, is now become useless. You are not fit for the kingdom. I can't use you. Why? You cannot have what's ahead if you're still looking for what you left behind. You can't have both. He says it's plain and simple. You got to let go of what's behind if you want what's ahead. You can't, it just doesn't work that way. He says that is the cost of discipleship. You have to make that decision. Okay? Now, in Luke 14, where we just were, in verse 26 and 27, Jesus again reiterates the cost of discipleship. He says, if any man come to me and hate not his father and mother and wife and children and brethren and sisters, yea, even his own life. Hate is Maseo, which is the most intense form of hate, but he's talking about in comparison to your love for me. He says he cannot be my disciple. And whosoever doth not bear his cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. Likewise, whoever he be of you that forsaketh not, which is apotasomai in the Greek, which means unless you say adio, farewell, adios to what's behind you, farewell to what's behind you, and renounce what's behind you. Have you renounced your old way of living and the world's value system, the Sodom and Gomorrah lifestyle, as it is in the days of Noah, as it is in today's culture? I'm not going with that mammon-driven society. Yeah, I have to live in it. I have to use money to be able to pay bills and to buy things, but it doesn't have me. I have it, but it doesn't have me. He says, unless you're willing to renounce what's behind you, you cannot be my disciple. Where else do we see this happening? In Mark chapter 10, if you'll turn there. In verse 17, as we wrap it up for tonight, it says, we've talked about this before, so we're not going into the whole story. Okay? It says, a man ran up to him and knelt before him and asked him, good teacher, what shall I do to inherit eternal life? Now, this is the story of the rich young ruler. Jesus responds by giving him the 6 horizontal commandments. Thou shalt honor thy father and mother, shall not commit murder, shall not commit adultery, shall not steal, shall not bear false witness, and shall not covet. And he says, I have done all these things from my youth, which obviously is a lie, because you know good and well he's lied before. You know good and well he's coveted, because he's a man of great wealth, and before he got that, he had to have a desire for what somebody else had. Okay, but still, he admits to that. But so he says he's pretty good on the horizontal commandments. It's those vertical commandments, that's why Jesus didn't mention them. Because he knows good and well that his vertical relationship is not intact. Okay? So what happens? He says in verse 20, and he said to him, teacher, I have kept all these things from my youth. Looking at him, Jesus felt a love for him and said to him, one thing you lack, go and sell all you possess and give it to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven. You got to let go of what's behind in order for you to have what's ahead. He's not saying for all of us to go and sell everything we have and live on the streets and live on the porch of the church here. No. He's not saying that. What he's saying is, this guy was so eat up, as we would use a phrase you would use, he was so eat up with mammon. He was so eat up with his wealth. That's what preoccupied him. That was the worldly activity that preoccupied and consumed him. And he says, if you want to follow me, you got to renounce that. But that's what grace demands you to give up. Somebody else doesn't have a problem giving up in that area. So he's not going to demand it. Okay? It's no different than somebody who's addicted to TV. God may say, if you want to follow me, cut the TV off. For somebody else who, they could turn the TV off and it don't bother them whether it's on or off. They're just not moved by the television. He's not going to ask them to give that up. He may ask them to give up sweets because that's what their problem is. See what I'm saying? Okay. And he says, but in these words he was saddened and went away grieving, for he was one who owned much property. And Jesus, looking around, said to his disciples, how hard it will be for those who are wealthy to enter the kingdom of God. Why? Because their trust is in their accumulated wealth. Okay? And he says, the disciples were amazed at his words. But Jesus answered again and said to him, children, how hard it is to enter the kingdom of God. It is easier for a camel to go through the eyes of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom. We've talked about this before. The eye of a needle was not a sewing needle. It was the 2 posts that the camel was pulled through to get wedged in there so they could wash it without it running off or kicking them and everything. And then once they got finished cleaning it, because the camel was the vehicle of the desert, and it obviously had a lot of dust on it. So then trying to pull it through so the next one can come through, that donkey put up a fight. And they said, you know how hard it is to do that? He says, it's easier for a camel to go through those 2 posts to be cleaned and then to be pulled out of those 2 posts than it is for a rich man to enter the kingdom. They were even more astonished and said to him, then who can be saved? Looking at them, Jesus says, with people it is impossible, not with God. For all things are possible with God. What we got to understand as we close is that we cannot see this story through democratic eyes. We cannot see it through monetary eyes. We got to look at it through kingdom lenses. And the kingdom lens says, look, this guy was so eat up with his wealth that he was looking away to buy salvation. He was looking away, can I make a donation? What can I do? And that's why he told him to go sell everything you had and give it to the poor. Because if he gave it to the synagogue, they would name a wing after him or a social hall after him, and he would be the John Doe Social Hall, and he would forever be reminded of his generous donation. He said, give it to the poor where there's no track record of it. You ain't gonna take it off your income taxes. You know, just give it to them and give it away. That was his demand. Why? Because somebody who's that eat up with wealth, it took that kind of a shock factor. Well, we may not be eat up with wealth, but we may be eat up with something else. What do we eat up with? Anger? What do we eat up with? Lust? What do we eat up with? Jealousy? What do we eat up with? Envy? What do we eat up with? Unforgiveness? What do we eat up with? An appetite for certain things? What do we eat up with? A bad habit? Jesus gives you the shock factor. That which you most eat up with is that which you got to give up. And you saying you giving it up? You saying you're giving it up? You saying you're going to quit? You committing and say, God is my witness, I'm going to never do it again. He said, at that moment, you're putting your hand to the plow. He says, once you put your hand to the plow and you make a promise to me, you're never going back. He said, don't you dare turn around longing for it. Don't you dare turn around with a desire to return to it. Because if you do, you're not fit for the kingdom. Your salt has become useless. You are no longer fit for me to use you in the kingdom. Yeah, you may still go to heaven. You're going to miss out on some rewards too, because I couldn't use you for the kingdom. You may be outside the gate, inside the camp, but outside the gate, looking at Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob and all the saints of old as they celebrate. And we don't want that to happen to us, do we? Okay, so do you understand the message for today? Don't look back. Don't look